Space Chums, we're here, episode 7, 17,000 miles an hour, hurtling along, and I can't believe where the time has literally gone. Today is a very, very exciting episode. We're going to sort of mix it up a little bit, where we're going to talk about public sector, private sector, where's the mix going to be, and what's the best way of getting into space. And I've got some very interesting Space Chums joining us here today. It's going to be a mixture of people joining remotely because of the travel conditions getting up into space today. We have here next to me, though, my great space chum, Sara from Star's Edge. Sarah, we're chatting a little bit about her, what she does in terms of low Earth orbit propulsion systems. We have our friend Derek from Skyrora, who will be talking about the involvement of private launchers in the ever-evolving space developments. And of course, we have Jason Roberson, one of my colleagues from Dassault Systèmes. And Jason's going to bring his US Air Force experience, which I have to say, if you look at his LinkedIn profile, is very significant. Jason has space running through him from his head to his toe. So without further ado, perhaps the guests can introduce themselves to all the space chums who are watching Liftoff, and then we'll get into the questions. So, Sarah.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Bruce. It's been such an amazing time, and I love being up here in space with you today. My name is Sara. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Star's Edge. We are a company working actively in the very low Earth orbit sector, looking to do both a platform and a air-breathing propulsion system to come up into space in the next year and a half. Exciting stuff, atmospheric satellites.
I think of it as surfing in space. It's very, very cool. Derek, a few words from yourself.
Hi there. Thank you for inviting me back along. I'm Derek. I'm the head of business for Skyrora. Skyrora is a small launch company based out of Glasgow, launching out of Saxon-Ford, and happy to be here.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's good to see you here again. And lastly, Jason, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me today, Bruce. And as you mentioned, I'm with Dassault Systèmes, so I focus on our strategy globally for the space segment. And I have the pleasure of interacting with lots of great players in the market, bringing innovation in and expanding that space economy towards the $1.8 trillion that the World Economic Forum estimated last year.
Okay, so I'm going to kick off, and we've very nicely stayed away from acronyms throughout this entire series. It's probably our greatest claim to fame. But let's start. What is VLEO?
So, for those of you who don't know, VLEO is the big new upcoming market that is all the rave recently in the space industry. It's very low Earth orbits, so we're looking at, there's actually no common definition. And at a conference recently, they were debating what should be the common definition of VLEO. It's mainly looking at about below 400 kilometers altitude, any satellites orbiting there. It's mainly defined by that high density area where we actually have to fight off air resistance with our satellites. And it's an area where satellites tend to decay quite quickly because of it. Do you know what the first VLEO satellite was?
Tell me.
It was actually 70 years ago, Sputnik. It flew at around a bit over 200 kilometers, 3 months, no propulsion, but it was our first.
Fascinating stuff. And what draws you to VLEO as an area to play in? And that's my language, pardon me, not your own, because I know you're far more super technical than that.
So it's, pardon me saying, but it is ultimately the future. We're looking at better downlink, better comms, better surveillance. It's an area that affects really all of us, all the major markets, both defense, Earth observation, telecoms, in-orbit sustainability as well, where we may be able to reach it with lower launch prices as we don't have to use as much fuel, where we might be able to use air-breathing propulsion, where we don't actually need to use fuel whatsoever to stay in this environment, to boosting our lifetimes of satellites much longer than what we currently have. It's a place where anything can really happen, from in-orbit experimentation, from refueling of your satellites in LEO, where they can dip down, go back up, and then just everything. We have less radiation, we can use better equipment. It's where ultimately everyone is heading, and you see that trend already with the super constellations, already wanting to reach lower and lower.
So viewers of the previous episode, when we looked at space startups, we had your other co-founder, Trion, on the session. And I, rather simplistically, but it did tend to engage and describe your technology. You're surfing on the edge of the atmosphere.
We are.
You're just scraping the oxygen off, and through the Harry Potter magic that you're developing, you produce propulsion. Is that right?
It is. It's a similar style of RAM engine that you'll see now being developed by a lot of companies. It was same sort of rough principles as what reaction engines used to do, but ultimately it's an electrical engine. We are able to collect air, funnel it into our engine, and accelerate it much quicker using plasma when it comes down to it. It's an ion engine with what you see in electrical propulsion, but it does exactly that. It surfs on the edge of space, collects fuel in situ, and then it stays there for as long as we can afford it to be there.
That's fascinating. And Derek, I'm thinking at the point which Sarah just made a couple of seconds ago about it's different to LEO, it's lower.
Yeah.
How does that impact the launching companies when they're planning their missions? Because you've got a stack of satellites and bits and bobs you have to get rid of on the way up.
I think the main difference there is just the sheer value versus the size and cost for the size of the vehicle. Obviously, there's a lot more space in a larger launcher than there are small launchers, and that sort of reduction of scales does the same for sort of the value of payloads and such that you can take up. So really, where the UK is leading at the moment are leading towards is the small launchers. So to do that, you're maybe getting 10 to 15% of profit off the full vehicle if you can manage to fill it. I think what you'll see moving forward will be sort of medium class launchers coming into the play as well. That way, it's equaling out the sort of profit for those privately investing in these companies compared to what would just be there for the small launchers to make sure that it's profitable and will continue to push that sort of trend of companies opening up in the UK forward.
And Jason, I'd like you to go to your wardrobe and take out the hat that you wore when you're in your military days. How is the defence sector looking at VLEO? Is this something which is an area for them, or are we still going to see the defence satellites perhaps higher up?
Well, I think you'll see both as defense and industry collaborate. And, innovation, in my opinion, is that innovation moves much faster in the private sector and can bring that to defense departments. So, as mentioned, the VLEO brings you a higher resolution, quicker revisit rate. And when you bring in hybrid architectures to transmit the data, you can get great data on your satellite, but if you can't get it off and get it where you need to, that's a challenge. So when you pair these capabilities, these commercial capabilities, and you mentioned the national systems that are doing surveillance and communication, well, there's still going to be the larger bespoke systems, but they've recently started integrating commercial into the strategy. And I think leveraging the architectures that the commercial sector brings along with military architectures to get those or higher resolution imageries or whatever the payload is on a VLEO, you're going to see greater speed in getting the product to the market. So it's of high interest, I think, because at a lower cost, you can get just as good of a product that you previously had to spend a lot more to get, both time and money.
That's fascinating. I just want to flip the question or bring it around into the actual launching side. And already we start to touch about the involvement of defence, the public sector, the commercial side of stuff. And it's going to be I wouldn't say an unholy mix. It's going to be a very interesting development in how that relationship works. Derek, from your perspective, a great opportunity for working with both the defence sector and public sector at the same time?
Certainly, I think what we're seeing now is the defence sector opening up and seeing how the commercial companies coming through within the launch community and the downstream communities and such with the data being provided is actually worked towards intelligence-wise, the adaptability, and basically being able to react to any sort of foreign threats with that purpose. So they're beginning to sort of take a grip of that, and I'm seeing that myself now. Whether it's with the different contracts that are coming through Dassault for R&D purposes, or whether it's actual contracts that are coming out through the normal procurement channels. I think what they're seeing is what's opening in the UK is allowing them to have a bit more choice in having to send everything over to the US. And it's giving much more opportunities for the smaller SMEs coming up at the moment with those bright ideas, to get them into orbit, as well as try to win sort of government contracts, which of course government contracts aren't just the money which helps the company move forward, but it's also a stamp of approval if you've managed to go through that sort of process and procurement, that your company is in good stead, and that helps towards the reputation. So I'm seeing that now, a lot more SMEs sort of getting pulled into that procurement sector, so it's a very good thing at the moment.
And I'm a great believer in asking what I call the naive question, or a question I'm really itching to ask, but if I ask it, I'll appear silly, so I'll ask it. What does your gut feel, Derek, for about the proportion between government-sponsored launches and commercial-sponsored launches over the next decade or so? Is that something which is in the thought processes of Skyrora?
It's a very good question, and it's something we've tried to push forward when we were asked by the UK Space Agency what we would prefer to see. And for us, we would like to see more government-sponsored contracts. Winning grants to build things is okay, but you can only work so long on grants, whereas contracts allow you to deliver a final product, and it helps the R&D, it helps moving the TRL levels of any sort of production, whether it's a space tug, whether it's a rocket, a satellite, or any next-gen sensors and such. It helps to move all that forward, but also then delivers something back to the public for that purpose. So that's kind of where I see it coming through. I think these sort of contracts can really help subsidise for the commercial launches. So other commercial companies that want to come in and do launches can go through that process, and maybe that will help to reduce the costs that the small launchers like ourselves would have. But certainly, I think at the moment it's mostly commercial that's at play, but I'm hoping in the next maybe 3 to 5 years, you will see that maybe change to a 60-40, so 60% government or military contracts.
That's fascinating. And I'd like to draw on, Jason, your experience now, and I've talked about your extensive experience in the USAF. You've seen things from both one side of the fence to the next, or say poacher turned gamekeeper now. Could you just, for the benefit of the viewers, describe or give your impressions as to how this collaboration between public and private sector and defence has changed in relation to space over the last decade or so?
Oh, yes. Well, I think collaboration between public and private sector has increased. On the topic of launch, if you look 10 years ago at the amount of space launches, orbital launches from the U.S., about 90% of those payloads were government payloads. And then today, that's really flipped, where more like 90% of them are commercial payloads. There was the transporter mission just a couple of days ago out of Cape Canaveral that was almost entirely commercial on board there. So that's just one area where there's collaboration. But as I mentioned earlier, the space architectures, how we transport the data. I know when I was on active duty, I at one point ran a satellite control station that also had other bespoke systems for like GPS that dedicated just to that system. We're seeing now more commercial teleports where you can do commercial command and control of commercial systems and augment those military systems. Historically, you think of military satellite communications or MilSatcom. I think when I left the military, over 80% of our SATCOM was coming from the commercial sector. And that's a collaboration that's been in place for a very long time just because of the demand signal. But as demand signal has gone up for launch and to get things into space, you see more commercial launch capabilities. We're going to see more come into the market because there is a bottleneck. And then also with commercial just services, we mentioned the we call it reconnaissance, or Earth observation might be a nicer term because people associate reconnaissance with spying maybe, but Earth observation systems where governments had loads of them in the past, but now as we see more and more commercial systems come into play and integrating those into our decision-making process as at all levels, economic levels, defense levels, humanitarian relief levels, there's just a huge amount of collaboration possible. And I think we are really moving in that direction, or we're really down the path already.
That's so interesting and refreshing to hear that the cooperation is vital for the expansion of benefits for everybody. I want to come back to surfing in space now because it's such a fascinating idea. Where the opportunities lie, is it going to be for commercial satellites, or is it going to be perhaps more in the defence sector?
So it's always a dual use technology when it comes down to it. By being lowered down, you are at a place where most space domain awareness is not ready to, for example, detect. So you can do much better surveillance, much better activity without having your assets compromised and leaked at times, their position. You're able to do much quicker maneuvering, so you get to where you need to much quicker. You have surveillance over an area times 10 times the amount that you would in these other satellites altitudes. You have better equipment, so it is a no-brainer to have that defense angle to it. But then commercially, you have so much more. So if you have your space sustainability companies, the ones looking to do repairing and refueling, if they can just refuel themselves in the atmosphere instead of having to use their own fuel on their own activity, and they can just dedicate that to their clients, that is more money for their value when it comes down to it. Earth observation, if you want to look at a city and have constant surveillance over that city, for whatever that might be, even if it is do collaboration with a maps application, it tells you, okay, you're driving here, there's a parking spot on your road, this is where you have to park. It increases the quality of life in a lot of measures, but then obviously it does have that angle for space domain awareness, space situational awareness, surveillance, that nice reconnaissance word we heard here as well, both from heavily defense point of view. So if you want to measure maybe where foreign assets may be, what you want to do with them. Information is power when it comes down to it. That was one of the biggest things we saw at MilSatCon this year, was that really emphasis on we need space now, not just in commercial, but specifically in the defense sector. And whoever adopts this technology first will be at a much better information advantage than other countries.
And given that the conversation just the last couple of minutes has been talking about government stroke defence, do you find it a challenge working with defence agencies, the governments, or does your heart lie with the creativity of the private sector?
So for what we're doing, ultimately, private sector is always the easier to navigate. It's always easier to get private equity funding. It's always easier to get, at times, smaller development grants. Working with the government is very different, or with the MOD here in the UK. You really have to match with their ideals and their spending goals. And we see that the UK MOD at the moment, how it is structured and how its priorities lie, is still with old space and not with new space. That agility is still not there. That room for improvement and innovation is still not there. And which is why we see very little big space projects that happen, and really not that many smaller projects, I would say. You see a lot of focus on the primes, but not that much focus on the SMEs trying to do that agile innovation. And I think in the UK, that's something we are behind compared to other countries. So I would say the private space is easier and more equipped to handle this type of new innovation at this stage in the UK than it would be elsewhere.
That's interesting. And just taking that relationship for a second, and it's a question for you, Derek. There's going to be a continuing growth of government-related projects because other government departments are available. Exactly. From a commercial perspective, is it a dilemma to balance the priorities? Obviously, we want to work with increasing British sovereignty from both a national perspective and also commercial. But do you see that as a challenge within your business? Whether to dedicate more resource capability to government contracts compared to commercial?
I think it depends on the company when it comes into it. For ourselves, there is a very tight balance because we're basically transitioning from a small into medium enterprise with that purpose. So we have a headcount of around 80 people. So if we were to have a contract like that, we would need to go through and start to hire in more staff.
Yeah.
So that puts our costs up, but also the more experience within the team and the headcount, and it's good for the area and the region we're in. So it's a very difficult decision for that, and it is something we do when we look at what we're applying for purpose-wise. So it's great that we can take a look at a contract and say, well, actually, our R&D team are doing something very similar for the rockets. It may work. It could be a control system or something for a hypersonic project. Yeah. Do we want to bid in for that? Yeah. Is it going to take us off our general path to launch, which we want to make sure that we do this year? No. okay, do we need any additional bodies? These are the sort of questions that we're having to go through now, which maybe 3-4 years ago we didn't even think would be coming up on us for that. So it is a bit of a juggling act with that, but again, having that sort of sign of approval that you accepted into these procurement programs is a big thing for us, because it opens up for other investors coming in. It's fine because we're solely invested in it at the present moment in time by one person, but if we want to bring others in, they're going to look at, well, where is the profitability going to come from, especially in as big technological infrastructure projects like launchers. There's a huge amount of money there. So it's that balanced act about making sure we're getting the right reputation, delivering the right products. And I think what was forgotten is a lot of the time when you go down these procurement channels, there could be things there for the smaller companies that may not have went through, whether it's the quality ISOs and things like this that will add actually additional costing and additional workloads. So all of these have to be finely balanced, but for us it's something that I think we're far enough forward that we would be happy enough to sort of take those challenges on board.
That's very interesting. And of course, Jason, perhaps a general statement here, but the US is more advanced in terms of the maturity of that relationship between the private sector and defence, and with your experience of travelling across the States, you'll pick that up as well. Is there anything which the UK can learn, Jason, from how the commercial stroke defence government relationship in the US has evolved over the last decade or so?
Well, I think, I think we have no closer partner, no closer ally than the UK. And what we've done together historically in defense and in other areas can be replicated for space. And of course, space touches defense, economy, it touches so many areas. But one thing that comes to mind when we talk about lessons learned, I think those are in place in other areas. If you think of the F-35 program, there's 18 nations involved, but the UK is deeply involved. And so I think what we've done there with the commercial endeavor, with the suppliers, with the international cooperation, that can be replicated in the space sector, in space projects. Now, I don't think there is a space project as big as the F-35 program, but there's a lot of space endeavors from which we can learn from each other. We've worked together on the International Space Station with actually putting humans into space together as well. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. In my time when I was on the Royal Air Force staff, I was always impressed with how much the UK was getting done with at times it seemed like the US, the budget and the resources were 9 to 10 times as much, but then the UK was right there in step. So I think once that continues, that work continues between US and UK, we're going to see a lot going forward. Once we get a first orbital launch from the UK, and as Derek was mentioning, you've proven yourself and you're on those contracts as a reliable source to do that. You'll see some of that bottleneck in launch that tends to flow to the US a lot can be accomplished from the UK. So I think it's going to be very interesting for the US market to learn more about small launch and spaceports. Our spaceports are a bit old. We have newer ones coming aboard, but the UK can start with a digital spaceport from the start and have things integrated in a digitalized network, whereas ours may need some modernization to get there. If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And what I loved about what you're just talking about there is you're actually reminding everybody of the rich history. It's not as if we've got to learn it from scratch. It's been happening for years. And this actually touches on a point which we could spend hours talking about, is how well does Britain promote itself in terms of the benefits of space. If you think back to episode 1 of the series, how do we communicate the benefits of space? And the general feeling about the UK space sector is we're not doing it as well as we possibly could do. There's a sort of historical British approach that we'll just muddle on through. But that's a subject for another conversation for another day. I want to sort of come back at that and look at the wonderful world of startups, because in my day job, when I'm not running fun things like this, I work with a lot with space startups, and the sheer variety of them is from armor plating, from space suits to the stuff you're doing, Sarah. Tell us a bit about how you navigate this framework. I think I was got a minefield, effectively, of regulations in the government sectors as a startup.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough. We do have help, and there are people we've come to rely on, and they've been really great, from lawyers to people at the agency as well, who can provide a lot of these frameworks, all these guidelines, so we're not entering into it head first and then coming halfway across our launch date, and then we have nothing regulatory compliance in place. It can be hard. I think when you go through a lot of the venture building, a lot of the accelerators, a lot of these things, there is not that much focus on compliance. It's something that you do learn more through industry. So it's something that you do see more from industry-focused companies, either spin-offs from major industry or people who do have that more experience coming through. But then from academia, it's not as prevalent. The UK itself, space regulation is hard, specifically when you're dealing with the unknown. So how do you police, how do you regulate something that you don't know how it's going to affect you yet? Yeah. Which is why international law for space is still so muddy and so unknown, which definitely is a hurdle for most companies. And it's a hurdle for most of these new inventions, new products coming into market. And I do think that does hamper quite a lot of innovation, which you don't see in every other country. The UK and Europe are the most strict when it comes to regulation-wise for launching, which is why we see you only have to launch out of this country. If you don't meet our measures, you're out. Yeah. If you don't meet some of these new regulations by ESA, you're out. You cannot do it with us. But then you don't see that in abroad. Yeah. You can launch through North America without meeting some of those same compliance regulations.
Is it more laxed or just more relaxed?
In a way, I believe so. They're more risk-friendly, a lot of the abroad, which is why you do start to see more innovation both in North America and also in the East as well, where they do value the failure and the innovation above doing it first go after 15 years of having it developed. So that is something that we do see that approach still in the UK, is that fear of risk, and something that I think we can improve on. On our end, we've been doing as best as we can, meeting the requirements where we can, but it's still an unforeseen market. It's an unforeseen technology, so we do expect some challenges still to come.
A question has just come whizzing into my brain, so I'll ask it whilst I can remember. Derek, what cooperation is there between, in terms of planning missions, etc., and generally advancing between the likes of yourself and potential customers like Sara and other organisations?
Certainly. Well, I think the big thing with that is it would be myself. So at this present moment in time, I head up our clients coming on board with us. So the biggest part that at the moment is to make sure that any missions that we are flying, we want to be as full as possible to, as I said, to try and maximize the revenue coming in off the vehicles, but also to make sure that the clients are happy. My background, I come from finance, so everything there was around making sure that the client and the stakeholders were always happy. And when I came into the industry, the one thing that I've kind of seen is some of the larger launchers are basically, it's, well, if you don't like it, find a different ride. So we've really tried to work it that way and build that relationship with our clients. So it could be, for example, Sara could come to me and say, I've got this device I want to test on a satellite, and it really needs to be some synchronous orbit, XYZ. Can you get it up on your launch that's coming in March? Take a look at the details and say, oh, sorry, Sara, and the actual details you need aren't there, but I do have one going in August. Is that too late for you? If not, let's see what we can do. So this is kind of what I'm trying to do with that. I don't want to turn anyone away. I'll happily look, I'll happily put the footwork in to go through and see what suits them. And I'm about to make an admission that my boss will probably strangle me for, but it could be that it comes up and we don't actually have what Sara needs. So it could be an equatorial launch. So in that case, I would reach out to my partners overseas and the people I know, maybe at Firefly or SpaceX, and say, look, I've got this person here. It really doesn't suit our payload capacity and our payload and our sort of manifests. This is something you'd like to speak to. And I've done that over the last few years because a lot of people have came to us, and it's just been too early for us coming. We weren't ready for our demo launch, so it's those sort of discussions I think would make people like Sara respect us a bit more, and it is also going to help the industry go forward. So there's one thing being competitors, but if I'm honest, this isn't football. This isn't Scotland versus England. For that purpose, there's enough business to go around. We can be friendly in that regards. So that's kind of where my thoughts lie on that.
The old firm rivalry, not necessarily between Glasgow and Celtic, but between the Scots and the Brits. And my parents were Scottish, just for the record, so I can say there's a certain degree of conviction. It's fascinating. But what I was going to say was, I'm relatively new to this sector, but even in the couple of years I've been working in it with people like Sara himself and talking to yourself, Derek, and obviously Jason's splendid input, it's the collegiate atmosphere. Everybody wants everybody else to succeed. And it's most refreshing when you come from another commercial sector, and there is, my product's better than your product.
Tooth and nail.
Tooth and nail. And that's a trend which has come out of all the conversations. There are other launching services going to be coming on stream up in Scotland soon. But you're working. Everybody's working together, and it's really super refreshing as a relative outsider to this. Jason, I want to talk to you about really now emerging trends between the defence and commercial sector, and perhaps look at it from both the US perspective and also an observation of what you're seeing happening in the UK. Are there particular technologies and particular projects, do you feel, which we're going to hear much more about and which actually get you going in the morning?
Yeah, I think the cool things or the sexy things in space have always been launch and been Earth observation and communication, and that's really spawning the mega constellations, the communication thing. Your OneWeb, your Starlink, but the areas that are I think exciting are the sustainability aspects in space. Space traffic management, really, if you think air traffic control, we need to do that in space. But right now, it's just, as mentioned earlier, awareness. So you've got commercial companies doing that space surveillance, space domain awareness, even companies putting systems in space, a space system to look in space at what's going on with other satellites. So we're seeing the situational awareness piece. Then we're seeing people addressing sustaining the environment. So we have a lot of debris up there, over 1 centimeter is estimated at over 1 million pieces, not all human made, but there are systems being developed to refuel satellites. So satellites being built to be refueled, gas stations in space. I think you'll see rechargers in space, maybe if that could come into play. You'll also the space tugs to reposition satellites that maybe still could do a mission but aren't able to move themselves, or removing of debris to make a less dangerous environment and move towards a sustainable area. But then as we see commercial space stations coming into play too, we're going to see this ISAM market, the in-space service, assembly, and manufacturing. So knowing what's going on there, servicing it, that's the first part, but then assembling commercial stations and manufacturing things in space to improve life on Earth. It won't just be through communications and observation and being able to put things in orbit efficiently, but we'll be able to bring things back as well in the things we manufacture there, including in areas of pharmaceuticals. So I think ISAM's a great area, but a lot of these companies, if they need to put something in space, what Derek said, here's where the bus goes and you get off where you get off. But so the bespoke launcher, being able to, I can put your payload where you need it, when you need it, is emerging too. And so I think this non-rideshare market that's coming into play, as well as the in-space development of more products for improving life on Earth. Those areas are exciting. And of course, we can talk about cislunar and lunar, but I think the more immediate more profitable areas are the traditional usable orbits like your LEO and out to GEO, in order to keep that data and those improvements flowing.
The whole idea of space tugs, it's the phrase which a 7-year-old would come up when you describe it to what the problem or what the challenge is and how you'll address it. It's so cool. And then you have for the UK listeners, we have the Automobile Association with the RAC. These are terrestrial repair services for recovering cars who are broken down, etc. To see that in space is going to be something which we're suddenly in Star Wars territory. We're suddenly in the 70s pop.
You already are.
Well, we already are, but it's amazing how technology is bringing what I was growing up with, it's suddenly going to be happening just like that.
Absolutely.
It's so cool. A question for you, Derek. I want to talk about the private sector and what the challenges for you guys working with the highly structured and very regulated sector of defence. Is it something where you meet in the middle, or perhaps they will relax their approach and recognise that you are a far more flexible and economical method of delivering?
I think it depends on the project. I think, and I would like to think that if the government sees a company they see as a rising star or someone that's going to be worthwhile to them, that they may not be available yet. So as I say, they may not have the quality standards, they may not have the information security stack, everything that you would need to get into this procurement chain. So what they may do is start off with a much smaller item, but with less requirements for this, and then help build them through so they can help guide them through this into the main procurement chain. So that's kind of what I already kind of see happening with the likes of the defence accelerators and things like this. This is why they've been set there. And so that if they can find these sort of companies, they can help develop them in so they can fall down that chain. And as you just mentioned there, things like space tugs, all this technology is really coming to the forefront now and being pushed. And some of them, so I think one of the biggest things I've seen recently has been a small company that's down on the outskirts of London who are trying to make a brand new robotic arm to work in space, to work with debris. So I think if you look at the ones you can currently get for space-related qualifications, you're talking maybe £1 million. And they're looking to try and bring this in around 100,000 to 150,000. So this will have so much of a knock-on to the industry that there has to be that sort of little bit of give and take. And that's why I think these sort of smaller contracts to help guide them through are happening and will continue to happen, because at the end of the day, when it's national security, you can't just say, yeah, everyone come in, okay, you don't have this, you don't have information security, let's just join the party, jump on in, and then that's where the information leaks from, and bad actors are sort of getting involved. But there are ways and means to sort of educate these newer companies like ourselves so they can come into the fold. And then sometimes other ones I've seen with that is just looking through other procurement programs where you will partner up with larger companies, whether that be Airbus, Dassault, or Leonardo. By working with them, that helps sort of the smaller companies sort of, again, pull their roadmap into line for what they need to be a top quality sort of provider to our defence and government sectors.
Very interesting you referenced the South London company. I'm not sure where we stand on commercials and adverts in this one. We can talk about Sara till cows come home. But I think you're talking about Lodestar, aren't you, with Neil Buchanan and his robotic arm, which is a fabulous piece of kit. These are just two examples of the sheer variety of what's happening out there. I mean, in my day job, I meet some really cool people working with armour plating, materials to mitigate debris, on new spaceware as well. It's constantly changing each day, and we go to so many exhibitions and conferences. Every day pops up something new. It's really super cool. I want to move on to the elephant in the room now, which we've talked about to a certain extent. In previous episodes in the series, we talked about sustainability. I'm not going to go into that minefield of sustainability, because when you watch the episode, you'll see that there's some very strong views as to what sustainability actually is. But that's one to watch. Go back for the show reel and you'll see it a couple of episodes back. But Sara, from your perspective, sustainability is lots of different things. You're recovering oxygen from the atmosphere, so you're extending the life of a particular satellite. Where do you see the role of what you're doing in sustainability from your perspective?
It's a bit everywhere. We don't know yet the negative impact that comes from emissions in the atmosphere and above. when it comes down to it. We don't know how much pollution we're actually creating with rocket launches, with satellites as they're running, both on electrical engines, on chemical engines, on satellite demise as well. There are no formal studies assessing all of this. I actually looked into it, and if we think about how much we've deposited into space in the upper atmosphere from space in the last year or so, it was about, I think, 70,000 round trips from New York to London worth of aviation fuel. Because the issue is we don't actually account for, in a lot of life cycle analysis, what happens when it reaches space. So once we're over the Kármán line, what actually happens to all of this? Debris is a big one. I've almost been hit by one when I was driving once in Portugal. Had to swerve the car away to not get hit by a big fireball from the sky. But it is much more than that, and we're really facing those issues nowadays with a lot of climate change. We've seen aviation trying to do better, but why can we not do better with satellites as well? And it's a big emerging trend now, sustainable propulsion. Propulsion that uses water, propulsion that is mainly using other chemicals, maybe like air or nitrogen, to be able to achieve similar benefits than you would have with hydrazine, which is not a fun chemical to play with. But ultimately, the goal is really being fuel-free. So we've seen attempts with the solar sails, the drag sails, where you're able to pull energy from the sun and being able to just stay there. For long-term space exploration, there are a lot of talks with nuclear as well. But with immediate around us in these lower atmospheres and these lower orbits, I feel like using the resources around us is a no-brainer, really. Why take fuel up there? Why carry that extra cost and weight when you can just refuel directly with what we have already up there? Why pollute when you can just surf, really, in that sense?
Just surf. And of course, there are clear implications for defence contractors and defence projects, because
Absolutely.
in my language, you can put more stuff on it without having to worry about the fueling payload as well.
With defense, it's always, so I've done some work with aviation and looking at some of the engines for that. When you look into defense requirements, it's always usually speed, acceleration, power, range, maneuverability, operability, and that's what we will start seeing more with space as well. Defense is not foreign to sustainability, and you do see more initiatives starting to pop up of how can we make defense more clean. Because ultimately they're happy to spend as much fuel as they have available if it means that they reach their goal that they need.
Yes.
So with some of these industries popping up and then with the VLEO market popping up and having that reliance on the atmosphere, you are making it directly more sustainable. And it's something if we can future-proof already by moving forward with the ESA Zero Debris Charter and some of these clean space initiatives and actually put these regulations in now, we can hope to not make as much a mistake as we have with other industries in the past. Not only now are we trying to make them greener. Space is the future, but we can already do quite a lot for it now to make it greener.
I mean, I could let you go on and talk. I've got so many questions I want to ask you about that, but I'll keep it for a rainy day. Derek, from the sustainability perspective, with the Skyrora developments, are you looking for more greener fuels? And we know there are various approaches for propellants, high impulse, for example, with the solid paraffin burning propulsion systems. What's the view of Skyrora to bring sustainability as part of the ethos of as you go forward?
I think there's a few main points we need to make with that when we talk about sustainability. When we talk about sustainability, we need to talk about sustainability and the common term that everyone thinks about, the environment and nature. We have to talk about economic sustainability for companies to be able to run while doing so, and also technological sustainability, that the levels that we have at the moment, can they actually continue to do so? So that when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about self-landing rockets and things like that. From Skyrora, we've basically had sustainability at heart since we joined in. After all, when you take a look at what rockets do, as Sara just said there, no one has really done anything to look at the particles from the fuel and such in the upper atmospheres. We saw when the heavy vehicle from SpaceX was done, there was people talking about the magnetosphere and such being affected with the launch. So these sort of sustainability in and around these studies need to happen and need to go. But if you hide away from that, that is where there's a bit of a problem. So we've been very lucky in this country. It started with Scotland and the Scottish Space environmental strategy. I don't think that's the right name, but if you check up Space Scotland's website, you'll find this. It was done by ASCO Agency and the Scottish Government, but they brought all of the players in Scotland together to sort of have this discussion. And they looked at the whisky sector, funnily enough, as they have just went through trying to bring everything back up to environmental standards to see what they did. And what happened is we sat down, we spoke to Extinction Rebellion, Friends of the Earth, and we tried to highlight, again, another roadmap that we could work along to try and get there. One of the things has been fuel. So you correctly said we've invented something called EcoScene, which is taking previously unrecyclable plastics and turning them into usable rocket fuels. The carbon reduction on that is about 70%, but unfortunately that 70% is from fossil to fuel and trash to fuel. It's not the actual burning particulates. There is a lot of sulfates with that. But these are the sort of things that are coming out of these discussions. And if we don't sit down and have the discussions, that is how sort of greenwashing comes through, and companies can sort of say, well, we're green, this is what we're doing, and do that. And to try and prevent that, you need to actually continue as a sector, I would say, to push it. It's not just an individual company. If it's just an individual company, you can get away with saying I could get away with saying EcoScene is 70% less carbon. Quite easily there. It's a nice little buzzword, but that's greenwashing without going into the full details of where the 70% reduction is. So I think working along with, as a sector, as you say, coming together and pushing it forward is the best way that we can do that sustainability. And that, again, will work with not just the environmental sustainability on Earth and in orbit sustainability, but also from an economic standpoint, because other companies will have great ideas there where you can share. And it's what the space sector in this country does so well.
And one for you, Jason, just building on that great answer from Derek. And a slightly cynical view, is sustainability, life cycle assessment, and I won't use the phrase greenwash because it's becoming too on trend nowadays, and it's rapidly losing its impact. How much do those issues matter to, say, the US defense sector and defense in general, you think?
Well, I think they do matter. The perspective that you have on sustainability, as Derek mentioned, is important. So a lot of people think of it as the pollution aspect, but and he mentioned the economic piece, but there's the defense piece too. Whenever I speak with a still active duty space operator, and I mentioned sustainability, they're thinking about sustaining their systems and protecting their systems from adversary actions. So it depends on your perspective there, but there's a lot that can be done, I'll say virtually. So as we move towards digitalization, whenever you manufacture something, there's just going to be byproducts. And whenever you launch something, that's just part of it. So where are the areas where we can reduce? And the more we do in the virtual world will make us more efficient in the real world. So if we we could do 100 rocket launches to see how our satellite performs, or we could do vibroacoustic testing in the virtual environment to determine how it performs before we do our first launch. So I think that the closer we bring the virtual world to the real world, we'll see a lot of just automatic benefits that will hit a lot of sustainability areas, both on the green side of things, but especially on the economic side of things. If you eliminate or significantly reduce, not eliminate, but significantly reduce your destructive testing of things, you're going to see better results in your books. So I think there's a lot of potential still to be brought forward from the virtual world to make things better in the real world, especially in the areas of sustainability.
And I'm so glad you brought it up, because a lot of the conversations have all been about the physicality of sustainability. I mean, I was gagging to ask you,
Absolutely.
in Velio, how congested is it? Are we talking the same amount of debris as we see higher up?
Realistically, nothing really there. We haven't sent much up there. Maybe Sputnik, some of its debris might still be up there, but really, other than that, it burns up much quicker. We have quicker deorbiting times, so it is not an issue, and it's why it's quite attractive area to look into for a launch.
And coming back to simulation, viewers of the series will realize we've been talking quite a lot about conceptual issues, philosophical issues, education, training, etc., protecting your IP in space is the one which is coming up in the next episode. But the whole idea of if you can simulate it, test it, you're going to get the best design quicker, and it's better for everyone, isn't it, really? That's a fair comment to make, Jason?
Yeah, I think it's the right kind of simulation. So if you simulate with poor data, you're going to have false results. So you had to have that physics-based simulation, and that's where it goes back to your product, having a virtual twin of your product, even down to the molecular level, to have a physics-based virtual twin of your product to do those simulations with. But simulation from the product to the factory through the launch process, and actually a virtual twin of in operations, really across the product life cycle. And you can also see something that's happening in operations and feed it back into your digitalization, your digital processes, your virtual twins of your products or your factory, to further improve and bridge that gap between the virtual and real worlds as you feed in real world data. So I think it boils down to having a proper virtual twin of your product, not just a rendering of your product, but a proper virtual twin.
So we've got a couple of minutes left here, and what's been an engrossing hour. And I say to myself, well, why can't we extend it for another 15 minutes? Well, because we all have time restraints, and we also want to move on to other stuff. I want to talk about collaboration now, because we're all talking about this from individual perspectives, or not as people, but from the respective areas we're working about. Sarah, some thoughts about public and private sector relationships. What's your experience? What's worked for you when you're building your vision?
It's going all right. It's public and private. It always comes down to when you're spending public money, you're spending taxpayers' money, and usually you want it to go to something useful, something that does bring back value to the country directly. Whereas when you're looking more at privatization, it's making money. That's the end goal. You do want to bring that benefit, but there's always someone above who's requesting that money. So it is two different end goals at the end. For collaboration, there is a lot of middle ground. So there is a lot of commercialization that can happen and that can bring a lot of money to people, but still, like I mentioned, improve that quality of life. So we've seen with a lot of global climate disaster at the moment happening, having that efficient disaster monitoring, having that effective, for example, wildfire detection before it really happens, is beneficial to everyone when it comes down to it. It's something I think we will start to see more, not just from geopolitical, but also a lot of this world that we start to live in now. It is inevitable, really, when it comes down to it. I don't think we are there just yet. The foundations are there and they're starting to be built. You do start to see more of that collaboration, but I think that's where it will really come to in the coming years, because ultimately you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have a lot of the taxpayer money without these jobs and commercialization feeding the economy and feeding the money that we can then spend back into the country. So it will happen. Is it there yet? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what you're making, what you're trying to do. We are still looking at a lot of old space mentality, the lack of agility, the lack of risk that I mentioned before.
Yep.
But I do think as things start to become more critical, and or just with innovation, as things start to grow much quicker, we do need that collaboration more actively. So we do need to come to compromises. Maybe private sector needs to move a bit more with that regulatory compliance, but still with their same speed, which maybe public doesn't want to secede on right away. So,
but it also feeds very nicely into what Derek was saying about how they see their developing relationship with commercial and the public sector, and it's finding the right balance. What are your thoughts on this, or what Sarah's just said? Pardon me, Sarah.
no, we have.
Derek.
Sorry, it froze a little bit there. I missed the question.
No, sir, but we're so high up here. The comms have been playing in and out all day. I'm dreading the journey back to Earth, by the way, because I've just got my suit and all hell could break loose. Sarah was just talking again about the relationship between the public and private sector and how has it evolved and how it's influenced what the work she does. Mm-hmm. I think you're already, though, taking that into consideration, Derek, with the way you described how you see the mix, the change between the public sector, whether it's defence or other government departments, and your commercial launches. So you're already starting to put in place these types of partnerships and thinking about how they will evolve.
You have a reputation of the company, but we also have the reputation of the sector at the moment. We have to admit the country doesn't have a huge amount of money to spend. So if you get a headline coming out of a newspaper or on a TV channel sort of saying 5 billion going to space program for XYZ, that really needs to be explained better to the public so they can understand that. If we want that support to continue, they need to understand that space isn't just a billionaire's playground, which seems to be what the press love to sort of portray it as. It's either portrayed as that or a science fiction film. But if we bring it back to the normal day-to-day person, so again, my background in finance, but the worst days on earth were when the systems went down and everyone couldn't use their bank cards. If people realised that the banking transactions were used via satellites, not just the GPS and Google Maps and other mapping systems to get from A to B, and how much it actually affects their life. Their insurance premiums, the insurance companies in the UK check for floodplain information. So what we've seen recently up in Leicester and the areas around there, the banks are already using this information for charging the day-to-day people for their home insurance. So the more that people can understand why this is coming in from a public point of view and what the technology is doing, they can understand that, well, okay, this £1 billion that's going into the programme, it's not just defence related, it's not just to give governments more information on what bad actors are doing, but actually it's trying to safeguard our property so we don't lose our carpets, our TVs, our photographs. But it's that education piece that needs to come forward with it as well. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And again, it's a subject which we've gone talking for so much longer. I want to, as we approach the end of this session, a couple more questions. One, I want to bring in Jason and draw on his extensive defence experience, and particularly how partnerships across NATO, for example, how they've changed over the time. Are those still going to continue being a guiding force in how we develop defence strategies? Is it going to be cooperation, or are we seeing a couple of days' time hiving off into a different trajectory of defence and space?
Well, I think that you will continue to see those cooperations, international cooperations, happening. NATO as an example, but commercial's even more of a player there, because often when you have a bespoke system that you've designed to provide your nation with a capability, you might not be as willing to share that outside of a few really close partners. So commercial can provide that to everyone. NATO can buy commercial imagery, and really with VLEO and with the amount of Earth observation available in the market now, you can get really good products really quick. But it's not just about defense too. It's across government and the public sector, where you look at NASA, they mostly are focusing on exploration and science and technology, but you can't get a better brand, I think, globally. If you come in and say, I'm with the U.S. Air Force, some places you might not get a warm welcome, but I can't think of a place where NASA doesn't get a warm welcome just because of it's kind of a for all mankind piece. So there's many aspects of the industry, including Department of Commerce has taken over our space traffic management efforts. So because there's a huge commerce aspect to it as well. So you look at your economic aspects, your defense aspects, and then your science and technology and for all mankind or all humankind aspects there. So I think you're going to see continued cooperation and collaboration in the defense sector, and especially bringing in commercial capabilities. The U.S. has also released a commercial space integration strategy several years back. They introduced a digital engineering strategy saying, here's how we need to digitalize. And then an instruction followed that about a year ago. So I think we will see some instructions, some commercial space integration instructions saying, okay, instead of just a strategy, here's how you're tasked to do it in the future. So I think we'll see more of that. And I think we'll see, especially I think NATO is a foundation of how we can make that happen across a very large population of countries.
Fascinating. One last question for all of you. We all know that the universe is expanding, that fries my brain just thinking about it, but space economy is expanding as well. Looking to the future, we've seen private launch delivery services. We talk about the innovation which you're bringing in, Sarah, and we've also got some very valuable insights from Jason on how defence is driving the changing space future. Is it possible for you to identify what one element or what elements are needed for the long-term success of space development? Sarah?
There's a lot of things that can be done. I think coming back to what Jason mentioned on the virtual twins, that is a big important aspect. It cuts costs. Yeah. Specifically in our industry, we don't know a lot of how spacecraft will behave in these upper atmosphere scenarios. We know density changes very abruptly. Yeah. And so you have to account for it in your engine and a lot of the modeling that you're doing. And it's quite hard to simulate that on ground with physical experimentation. So digitalization is definitely the future there. It makes it so we don't have to spend all that money repeating all these tests, actually sending a product up that we know could fail because we don't understand it just as well. That is where I could see a lot of innovation that brings a lot of help into the industry. Second thing is just collaboration. That's the name of the game in the space industry. The more we work with each other, the more we all as a humankind can achieve in the end. And which is great seeing all these partnerships between government, commercial, and defense as well.
And Derek, from your perspective as a launch provider, pointy rockets going up there, etc., what is do you think the future of your business is critical to have in place?
Yeah, I can see the expansion going forward in space manufacturing. So we have a space tug in development as well. For anyone that's followed us from the beginning, it's been something that's been on basically the plan since day one. Is part of our third stage and is already sort of at quite a high TRL. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in the demo being tested. These sort of movable platforms are just going to increase a huge amount of things up there. So we have companies in the US like Think Orbital who are looking to build space stations up there, just out of sort of hexagonal panels. Being able to have these additional orbital facilities is going to unleash a lot more R&D and a lot more sort of benefits to Earth. So I've spoken to companies that are looking at doing fertilization in space in regards to humans for sort of space travel, but also looking at doing growing of organs, because trying to grow lungs, it can be done, but on Earth you've got gravity to deal with, whereas up there in the orbit, in these space stations, it can actually be done in sort of without that gravity affecting it negatively. So there's a huge amount that's going to come out with this in-orbit servicing and using the LEO as a sort of R&D station now. So I think the next 5-10 years are going to be very interesting with the companies coming along.
And Jason, last but by no least, could you perhaps take that spin of what the critical element is, but looking at it from the perspective of how do you balance the need for innovation, pushing forward great stuff like Sarah was doing and the work of Derek, and securing national security? Is there a compromise? What's your view on what we need to have in place for that as we go forward?
I think defense has an interest, or really a nation has an interest in fueling innovation in order to keep your industrial base modernized, to keep technology flowing from within your country, both to feed defense, but to feed science and technology and to feed your economy. So I think that it's a mutually beneficial area for defense, your economy, and for the future of the space industry.
Perfect answer to end on. And it's with great sadness that I bring this particular episode. We've got one more left to come out in the next couple of weeks. I'd just like to say to all of you, Sarah, Derek, Jason. So it's with a heavy heart that I say thank you very much to all of you. Goodbye, Space Chums, episode 7, one more to come. Time to say like, think, subscribe, ring the bell. And also, if you're interested in wanting to work with us, if you've got a bright idea on a Friday night, all the people who are engaging with us will be talking to you a little bit later after Series 1 and hopefully get your products into space faster. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.